they're sort of we can start with one of two ways. I can either give some sense of my background and what I'm seeing in the field first, and sort of ramble for about 3 to 4 minutes. Or people can kind of say, like, this is the stuff that's keeping me up at night. And then I can kind of listen to that. Questions can be asked at the front end, and then I kind of ramble in response. Either way, I'm going to ramble at some point. Um, but what I like to have is a conversation, because it's really easy for someone, in these situations to just talk and it not be relevant, because I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you're thinking about and what you're working on. So it really is your call, and I'm totally flexible. I've done this at this point, multiple times. So it really is up to you guys. I would love to know who's in the room regardless. So maybe just quick intros would be great to start, and then you guys can ponder over how you want to approach this, and we can take it from there. Sorry, all of my sports things are going off right now, so I'm going to silence my phone. Everyone's like, Zion's back and the world is amazing again. So who's in the room? Okay. Cool. And I heard everything except for your first name. Is it Khalil? Khalil. Okay, thank you. Hey. Yes. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And I'm Lauren. So with that, I'll kind of like, I guess I'll do the same thing that you guys have done and be vulnerable. Um, so, I'm not an artist by trade. I have no pliable skills other than being, slightly loudmouth. Um, I have a law degree, but I've never practiced. Um, and I ended up in the arts after spending 6 years as a lobbyist. I was primarily, can you hear me okay? Oh, sorry, did I say something weird? What happened? Oh, okay. I'm used to having people kind of be like, no, when I'm talking. So I was like, is that what happened? Did I say something? I was a lobbyist. I'm so sorry. I was a lobbyist. Um, no, but I was a lobbyist for 6 years. I did a whole bunch of telecom work. So I worked for Comcast. I did the Sirius XM merger, and that was like fresh out of law school. Really doing things that, candidly are artist adjacent without knowing it, because no one talks about like the content that Comcast is doing as being artist adjacent, and nobody thinks about radio as being artists really anymore, and especially at that point. But what we were really trying to do is, I was with a small boutique African American firm that was led by the first African American to serve as majority whip of the House before Jim Clyburn, and I was their first hire. So I'm fresh out of law school, and I find myself at, in hindsight, was really the intersection of arts and technology, because Sirius was new, XM was new, they merged, and now they're Sirius XM to this day. But I was sort of the low-ish level staff person in a really small firm that really governed whether Black radio jockeys would, or whether Black content would ever be on Sirius XM, and that was actually a pretty fraught issue, in 10 years ago. Um, and then with Comcast, we were doing video franchising, which was, again, making sure Black communities, at that point, the Verizon Fios and Comcast Xfinity. Verizon was a cell phone company, and Comcast was a cable company. And what I know in hindsight is they were both trying to build out fibers, so not using telephone lines to get cable content out. Um, and the big debate was um, most of those were governed by individual. There are these little. I'm going to call them neighborhood councils for lack of a better phrase. But Verizon was fighting to not have to go to each little neighborhood council in every state they wanted to build out Verizon FiOS, whereas Comcast got in early and was able to build out to entire states. And Comcast was essentially saying, we've got this entire state built, but if Verizon is going to get in here, they have to build out to low-income communities at the same level they build out. For every one low-income community you build something out to, you have to build out to a high-income community, and vice versa. And those are primarily Black communities in Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania was a big battleground. So I've been working with artists for 10, 12 years now. I just didn't know it. Fast forward, I got out of the artistic sector, stopped lobbying. I was a fundraiser for a bunch of large nonprofits in the DC area, raised, $12, $15 million a year, and got burnt out doing capital campaigns for poor people. I was working in homeless shelters, food pantries, that sort of thing, and got a call from Fractured Atlas, which is the largest association of artists in the country. And took a job there because I was like, I'd love to work in the arts, and there are poor people in the arts. And sorry, I laugh whenever I say that because I'm like, there are totally poor people in the arts. We don't talk about artists living in poverty in the same way that we talk about everyone else living in poverty. But really, my background has been in empowering people to raise money to access the services they need to be successful. And now that I'm at Fractured Atlas, helping artists build businesses, which has been really cool. As another aside, I am a founder. So I have a startup that's really trying to get Black creators into immersive storytelling. So in the virtual reality, augmented reality sector. We've just raised $150,000 with another probably $75,000 or $100,000 coming in a couple months. And there are a couple different ways that we're thinking about deploying that capital. One is to build a platform for the distribution of existing content. And the second is to actually begin producing original content. Neither one of us are content creators or artists, but what we're trying to do is really think about what are the new models as the sector continues to evolve. People tend to think about it evolving either as virtual reality games, and the gaming sector is pretty developed and relatively oppressive to creators and intellectual property owners and artists. And the other is the film industry, which has been around for 110 years and started with big film studios and sucks for actors, and especially Black actors and actors of color, and Black artists of color. So, that's me in a nutshell. And I'd be happy to sort of get to know beyond the folks who are working for ZooLab, which I guess is most of you, sort of what are the things that are keeping you up at night? Like, how can I be helpful? What questions do you have? I don't have a prepared presentation because I find that often it's just a conversation about hey, I have a label. Hey, I have a band. What are you seeing out there? I should also say that Fractured Atlas has a small venture capital fund that is investing in new technologies at the intersection of sort of art and creativity. So, in a number of our portfolio companies have come out of, I guess, at least one that I can think of so far. So we invested in Electrospit with Maya and Bosco. I think that's the big one out of ZooLab. Aleph, have we invested in someone else? I think that's the big one. Yeah, I think Electrospit's the one. But a lot of the work, if you're building new technology or have seen new technology coming out of Oakland or the San Francisco Bay Area, we'd love to know about it. So I'm kind of wearing a bunch of different hats. And yeah, this is just a conversation.
Well, I guess what excited us, the CEO, it was a black woman led band and
Yeah.
Is it more of an admin side or artist? The band members are artists, and then the lead singer has a group of artists, blah 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 blah. So we're thinking that it's now Planet Future Relic, which is like a network that takes care of artists who are doing similar work, but obviously, doing their own thing. So I guess for us, it was kind of like learning what you do, what we just heard a little bit more about, and then like we had a meeting today with Aleph. Like, what are our first steps? What kind of
Hmm.
work can we do? And I guess we're just, I don't know. It's so many questions. I'm trying to think. What do I ask you specifically?
Yeah. No, I think that's like super helpful. So, and I actually feel like I'm in you go through phases in your own life, and this is why I like not having a presentation. Like, so I had a meeting with some lawyers in Denver about my company
Mm,
today, and my mind is blown, and I feel so generative because we're thinking about being a black owned co-op, right? So what we could be is a network of artists who are black VR content creators, and would be happy to share with you some of the resources they're sharing with me and resources I've been reading about, like, one, the history of black cooperatives in the United States
mm,
and why we don't talk about them now. And mostly we don't talk about black cooperatives as an economic driver, and why the only reason why we don't have more cooperatives that are outside of sort of the white agricultural sector anymore is because like people had like life threatening situations or they were killed, which is a sad fact. But this idea of what can a network of artists look like that are black artists, that is a black woman led network, it's actually really a political statement that is such a forward driver for our particular community, as a community that, unlike other ethnic communities and immigrant communities, has not ever been allowed to gain wealth and organize, right? And I don't just mean like political organizing, but most certainly organize economically and cooperatively and collaboratively with one another in this country. Like, it's such an interesting, and I just like had a call this morning with some attorneys. Denver has Colorado has some really interesting models, um, that will. So my company will be writing more and more about this experience we're going through as we think about becoming an artist-led cooperative. Um, and I don't know enough about labels and musicianship to know. I know what a label does. It seems like it's a marketing thing, but there are these words that kind of tie me up as a non-artist. One of them is producer,
mm,
because sometimes a producer means like you're the person who makes the beats in music. And then I was at South by, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a producer with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and she uses the word producer in a totally different way. So producer is kind of a fuzzy word for me, but I do think about what does organizing look like for liberation a lot. Um, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like, how can I be more than just a simple platform that's driving revenue? What can it be like to be a platform or a network that is driving something that's value centered, not just revenue centered?
that's great.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I mean, like, how do you structure that? Like, what do you
Yeah.
think about when you're thinking about like the actual structure of something that could be spreading across
Yeah.
the country to different communities, and like, how do you set that up to like give whatever comes in goes out to all those people? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm like. I'm literally having that. I had that conversation at, it was noon Eastern, so like 9 your time. I had that conversation today, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But it was really, what was heartening to me was I had all these thoughts in my head about what it couldn't be,
Mm,
and I talked to attorneys who said like, actually, all the thinking you're doing is far ahead of the people who've come to us in the past. And this is totally doable. And we can make this as flexible as you want it to be. And you can phase it in however you want it to. And I feel very fortunate just coming off that conversation as I hear you talk about what you're trying to build, Khalil. Like, um, I had my own and I have a law degree, right? So me not knowing Like I had this moment where I was like, shit, I'm working with these artists who also don't know, because it does seem like a daunting thing. And for these attorneys who have been doing this for the last 6 or 7 years, they're going to provide me with a variety of different structures. And they were like, this can be whatever you want it to be. Like like Colorado has a super flexible model. Um, and I would be happy to share what we're doing with you as we learn. And part of it is we have a funder who is financing our conversation with the attorneys up to the point where we decide to actually do it, and then we pay for that. But regardless, the goal is to share the learnings with the field, with the artistic field generally, because what you're there's people are producing content at such a rapid rate across everything now that things are getting lost. Like there's a lot of good quality content that's lost on YouTube, on Spotify, on SoundCloud. There are people who are doing amazing work, and the cost of production has democratized itself to the point where it's really, I won't say easy, but it's easier than it was when you had to, like, I remember like my closest thing doing anything was like me trying to stop 99.5 FM at the right point where I wouldn't hear them say 99.5 FM when I wanted to hear like Jodeci. Like I wanted to cut that Jodeci clip off at the right moment, in the 90s. Like that was as good as I could do. But there's so much content now. I think people are moving into to phase 2 of content, which is how do we sift through it and how do we organize ourselves around the content that we want to hear? How do we support the artists we want to hear? Not just one artist, but like multiple artists at once in a way that feels egalitarian and democratic and like not extractive. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So I dig everything you're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting that like that creative ask of having the funder pay for the lawyer. Like what led you sort of to like come up with that idea? I think like just that like is innovative and it's maybe not like a lot of people would think of in terms of like strategy. Yeah, if you could expand on that.
So we were pretty fortunate in that this particular funder is a learner. Um, um, and so we had, sort of naively just been talking about what we were doing in a way that was just like excited. And I would be like, I'm reading this thing. And she was like, you should publish a blog like every month, and just like all the random shit you read, because I read a lot of random shit. And then it got kind of like, oh, well, you're serious about doing this thing. And I actually, the articles that you've been telling me about, it was a really random happenstance, I think. And I feel really fortunate. And that's a great question, because I do think that there's an opportunity to fund our learning. And so my full-time job, Fractured Atlas, is, a really large fiscal sponsor. And we should probably talk about, if none of you know what fiscal sponsorship talks about, what it is, we should talk about that. And I'm in the midst of doing we're totally rebranding everything, website. So we're interrogating, who is your audience? What's your ideal customer? I'm bringing in, we'll have our first CRM and sort of, using AI and technology to drive our marketing. And I asked one of my colleagues who'd been at the organization for a while, like, what's your ideal customer? And she was like, well, you are. And I was like, why am I your ideal customer? And she was like, well, think about it. Ooh, excuse me. So we got $150,000 from a foundation. And she was like, you essentially walked in the door and said, I have this grant and I need a fiscal sponsor. And I was like, well, lots of people do that. We actually get a fair number of projects who have grants of various sizes who mostly don't know they need a fiscal sponsor until someone offers them money and says they want a tax deduction. And she was like, yeah. She's like, difference is you don't begrudge us the 7% that we take. Like everybody else is angry that they're walking in the door with that money. but like you're not angry about it. And like really understanding what your audience is super important. And it was weird for me that we got there through like a learning process. Like the money that we've essentially gotten thus far has not been to it's been to do some stuff, but it's been mostly to essentially provide a foundation or a funder. They want us to document and write about what we're doing with the money that they give us in a way that's not a grant report. So we're doing a series of convenings about Black and Brown people who are working in the immersive storytelling industry. We're working with a group of attorneys to think about what cooperatives can mean for artists. Like people are giving us money to do things that aren't really about what we're doing. It's about what can inform other people to be able to also do that thing that most people aren't thinking about doing. And then that makes me a little nervous sometimes. Because what I'm still trying to wrap my brain around is the money driving what I'm doing, or is what I'm doing attracting the money? And I'm not quite sure about that yet. But it is relatively unique. And I've been fundraising in the nonprofit sector for for over 10 years at this point. And getting dollars to learn in a way that's not like research data driven is really rare. But I do think that if artists are doing I think we have a lot of artists who are doing things that have never been done before, but they assume that the stuff they're doing has been done before. So what I like about ZooLab is the folks that I've spoken to there understand, are they doing something new? Are they building on something that's been done before? Or are you doing something that's been done before just better? Do you know what I mean? I think there's nuance there, but actually having a community of people who can tell the difference, because that difference can drive the conversations you're having with potential investors and funders. And I think that's really cool. Like talking to Rhyme Combinator about what they're doing has been really interesting to me. And the intersection of folks, because whenever you talk to somebody, you get a whole different lens about it.
How does Fractured Atlas go about choosing which artists or projects to fund, or to be part of? Do they become part of Fractured Atlas? Or?
Yeah, so there are two different levels of fiscal sponsorship, and I always get them confused. There's a Model A and there's a Model C. I could flip a coin and give you an answer on which one we are, but I can tell you the difference between the two. So I believe Model A is you become a project of an organization, which I believe is what ZooLab is. So you actually, ZooLab does not have, or the money that's flowing in that's from the nonprofit sector does not flow to an entity that is a for-profit entity that has a separate identification number. You, in essence, become a program of an existing nonprofit. And you get deep back-end services, meaning someone else, so you don't file your separate 990. You're probably having someone do accounting for you. You do not have a separate bank account, all of those things. And I'm not saying that in a way that means better or worse. I'm just saying that's the legal structure it falls under, and that's the sort of financial structure it falls under. Fractured Atlas and my company is actually is a for-profit business that is fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas, which is my company, and has grant dollars that are coming through Fractured Atlas to my company. Fractured Atlas has 5,000 projects, between 4,500 and 5,000. It fluctuates, but we'll say 4,750, whatever. Just split the difference. What we do is we allow you to be able, you have to have a separate, either a U.S. Social Security number or a separate EIN, meaning a federal employer identification number. And what we do is we allow you to receive charitable dollars that after they leave Fractured Atlas's bank account become taxable dollars to whomever receives them, whether they are the corporation or a personal individual. Um, we don't do back end bookkeeping, although I will say the level of when you're doing a request for the funds that Fractured Atlas is holding on a project's behalf, you do have to sort of say this is what it's for. It ends up becoming sort of an accounting system that makes doing an annual report or reporting to a grantor easy. But there is that difference because, in essence, if the folks who are working for Zoo Lab are working for a nonprofit, and I guess your checks do not say Zoo Lab. Yeah. However, if you were to be a fiscally sponsored project by Fractured Atlas, you would either be paid as a 1099 contractor from an entity that was not Fractured Atlas. So that's really distinction, and that's like an accounting thing and a sort of what do you think an organization or a company needs to grow. For us, it really was about being something that was flexible enough to, sort of firm enough as a company and as a legal entity to be able to do what we wanted to do while also retaining charitable dollars. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that hit me right when you started speaking about fiscal sponsorships, we've been talking about that for the Planet Future Relic idea. Because I think it's still 2 years. When you have a fiscal sponsor, you can still be a for-profit and a nonprofit at the same time for 2 years. Is that what it is? Or something like that?
So we've had fiscally sponsored projects that have been with us for 10, 12, forever. Hey, y'all. Who let the hoodlums in? What's happening? Yeah, exactly. No, so fiscal sponsorship, I think, people when I was working in DC in like the homeless sector, foster care sector, they would send people to me all the time because I was the only person who'd be like, please don't become a nonprofit. Like, please don't. Like, the nonprofit sector and the nonprofit model is broken on so many levels. It is incredibly limiting with regard to what you can do and how you can profit from it. I'm actually having a little bit of deja vu right now with Bosco standing behind Khalil. I have lived this moment before. It just happened. It wasn't happening before. But this beautiful black man like totem pole thing that's happening is like a real. I feel like I had this moment. I've lived this life before, but so I always discourage people from from forming a nonprofit, especially if you're in the arts sector. Like, the arts sector is the sector that's probably most advanced with thinking about funneling charitable dollars. People who don't have a separate nonprofit 501c3 designation, use that. And unless you're doing $1 million a year regularly in business, like in charitable gifts, I should say, not business, but charitable gifts, there's really, it does not become affordable for you to set up your own nonprofit. And that's just sort of but when you're thinking about, accounting, bank fees, I mean, everything you have to do to run a nonprofit in a way that is having board meetings regularly, like taking notes on those board meetings regularly, keeping track of receipts, making sure that all of your accounting adds up to whatever is left over at the end of the year. If you happen to have anything left over at the end of the year, is funneled back into the nonprofit itself. You got to do $1 million a year every year. Which is why I've always been like, the nonprofit sector, if you can't find someone to fiscally sponsor you where you are a program of that organization and they are absorbing your costs, payroll is expensive. If payroll can be $300 a month for one employee. Like, payroll is just straight up expensive. So when you start thinking about all the little hidden costs of running a nonprofit, being fiscally sponsored makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, but no, there's no limit. We've got this guy Daniel Banks who runs DNA Works out of Dallas Fort Worth. I mean, he's on my ass all the time about something he wants Fractured Atlas to do. He's been a member for probably 12, 15, like 12 years, I'd say. And Fractured Atlas has only been around for 20 years. They've been doing fiscal sponsorship for, I think, probably 13 or 14 years. We started off doing insurance. So we were a health insurance company. We had a small fiscal sponsorship organization, and then really got into the health insurance industry before Obamacare went into effect. Um, so there's no limit. You can be fiscally sponsored for as long as you want to be.
But if you're not, if you don't want to do that and you want to be a for-profit, what's the decision making on like when to register based off of financials and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I am not a barred attorney in the state of California, and and I'm not a certified accountant anywhere. Um, it's a personal decision about what your tax liability is, and what sort of protection you want from. What kind of protection do you want if something goes wrong? I encourage people at a personal level to go ahead and incorporate. Typically, I say state of Delaware, just to have some protection until you figure out what you want to do. It's like before you sell a ticket, um, before you build anything, go ahead and form an entity in the state of Delaware just to protect yourself. Um, Typically, most people go with an LLC. Some people go with a C corp or an S corp. Um, but an LLC provides just a great level of protection for artists, because you never know where it's going to go, and it has the flexibility. Like what you start off with doesn't have to be where you end up. And I think we often get locked in. Aleph, you and I have had conversations about how expensive it is to incorporate in California. But just because you live in California doesn't mean you have to incorporate there. So I think that's the thing that you and I have been noodling around with the flowchart. And sort of as I'm researching more, California does seem to be a really expensive state to live in and do business, um, which means you have, as a business owner, you have a high level of protection. But if you're in a low risk field, if you're not in construction, you probably don't need that level of protection. Um, so for artists, especially artists who are traveling, you probably want to think about incorporating someplace that's not California. That would be, sort of something that I would encourage you to research. So that's a good question.
What things does it protect you from?
Mm. I'm sorry, a little louder.
What things does it protect you from?
So an LLC, if you form an LLC and you have, um, so once you form an LLC, you should also get an insurance policy that is like a liability insurance policy, and that will protect you. And I don't mean to be, I don't want to be. There's a word. I don't want to be too dark, I guess.
Yeah.
But like when I read there, the Times did a long form article about the ghost ship fire, um, in Oakland. I guess it's almost 2 years ago now. And when I'm looking at that, I see a group of artists who never really figured out what they were trying to do. And if someone had thought to incorporate and get a liability policy for that situation, chances are that before the policy was issued, they would have been asked to make sure there were a certain number, like some things that existed in that space. Everything from a sprinkler system to, hey, maybe you should have this many people there. Hey, is this a residence? All of those things. And then if something were to happen, they would not have been issued the policy, which meant they had to fix some things. They would at least know something was wrong, or they would have been issued a policy and people could have, been compensated for their loss. I personally am a huge fan of insurance, but I think forming.
I was just trying to close out because
We got
the
audio
internet
on
was
there.
messing
She's
up, and
still just
Oh, good. You're back. Can you guys see me okay? Yeah, you can see me or no?